So, without further delay, I'm going to introduce Regan Toni, who's going to do a presentation on In Search of Home, exploring addiction and recovery narratives through the lens of attachment. And this was Regan's thesis research. So we're really excited to have you come and share this with a broader audience today. I'll turn it over to you to take it away.
Perfect. Now I'm just realizing that there we go. Okay.
So now we can see your notes. I don't know if you're okay with that. Okay, there we go. Perfect.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm so sorry about that. So thanks for this opportunity to present my work. I'm actually really excited to do this. I defended this thesis at the end of September. So it's kind of fun to get to talk about it again in a less stressful environment, although to be honest, that was fairly stressful, me trying to log on and share my screen. So to start out, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm presenting this morning from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional land of many First Nations, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota peoples, and the homeland of the Métis people, whose ancestors have lived on and been stewards of this land from time immemorial. I also recognize that this land has been subject to profound suffering and violence, including the displacement, cultural suppression, and exploitation of enslaved people, often to facilitate the taking and development of these very lands. We recognize the enduring legacy of these injustices and the ongoing impacts of colonialism. Okay, so here is my outline, just what we are going to talk about today. So motivation for my project, I have some personal lived experience with addiction, and then also have a lot of people in my life that I love that have experienced addiction to some extent or another. I've worked in and adjacent to the addictions world for about the last 10 years and have witnessed the importance of competent and empathetic support grounded in the knowledge and reality of people's circumstances and their unique experiences. I've worked both inpatient and outpatient addiction treatment. Currently, I'm working as an outpatient addictions counselor, and I've also done some outreach and some medical social work, which also cross paths with addiction. I'm dedicated as a social worker to strive to provide effective and empathetic care, and therefore I'm always trying to deepen my understanding of people's lives. And one of the important things that has brought me the most joy as a social worker and researcher is creating opportunities for people to safely share their stories. I really like the framing of social workers as empathetic witnesses, which is something Gabor Mate has said, and like kind of borrowing from Alice Miller with that. So people in the helping profession, supporting individuals and validating, bearing witness to their story and the suffering it contains, rather than being compelled to focus solely on fixing. This idea has served as a guiding principle and reminder for myself of the value of social work and the impact of just being present with people rather than worrying about always trying to fix something. So that's where this project came from. Just some definitions to cover quickly. So substance use issues and addictions, I use both of those terms, allowed people generally to just use whatever term feels best for them. But also in the research, those words are kind of used interchangeably. So just a brief definition there for you. I also use the term drug of choice, which is a bit antiquated, but still the term most used in research. So referring to whatever particular substance or substances someone is more drawn to using. And in terms of recovery, this was really important to me that I have a really broad definition that I use of recovery. So I wanted people to be able to self-identify what recovery meant for them. I found a pretty great description for recovery that I relied on, that was come up with by White as the researcher, but it defines it as a process of and sustained status from which individuals, families, and who are impacted by severe substance use engage in a process of resolving these issues and heal the wounds caused by their substance use while actively managing their vulnerabilities as such problems. So important to say that I do not hold the stance that recovery means sobriety necessarily. Those two things are not always the same. It can be for some people. So I underwent my literature review where I just kind of looked broadly at a lot of the addiction research is out there, not all of it because it is vast. But I looked kind of in what's going on in our Canadian context, which of course we have a drug toxicity epidemic happening and high rates of overdose. And in terms of what the experts are calling for, it's really those harm reduction measures and doing more than it is that we're currently doing in that regard. There is a lot of different theories on where addiction comes from and what causes it and why it is so difficult for people to overcome. There isn't actually a lot of consensus amongst the research is basically the big takeaway there. There obviously is a well-documented relationship between trauma and addiction. I became quite interested in attachment and how its role in addiction. I took a look, I had to go way back to the 60s to look at the foundational attachment research, which would be John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth's work, and looking at the idea and where it came from. So John Bowlby, of course, was kind of our foundational knowledge about attachment, and he described it as, so he proposed that the relationships formed between infants and their primary caregivers are formative and continue to impact an individual's self-concept, perception of their environment, and their relationship with others throughout their lifetime. So key being that it's established early in life, but it continues to impact us throughout lifetime. Mary Ainsworth then took that work and created those like typings of sort of insecure attachment. And that people create a working model of themselves and the world around them based on those early experiences. So when I looked at attachment and addiction, there is actually not that much research out there on the topic, but what is there was predominantly focused on that typing, sort of anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and substance use. So I looked a little bit more to Kansian's self-medication hypothesis, which is basically, he came up with the idea that people that are drawn to substance use are using to self-medicate for issues that they are experiencing. So whatever substance they are drawn to is because it alleviates or ameliorates the experience they're having with that. And then Flores proposed that addiction is a disorder of attachment, and that it is because of difficulties with attachment that people are drawn to addiction, and that the addiction itself also impacts their ability to form relationship, and so that it's kind of a relationship that goes both ways. So I wanted to look at it a little bit differently. I wanted to look at sort of what attachment experiences, how attachment experiences influence a person's propensity to developing an addiction, but also if we look at that relationship that they develop with substances through the lens of an attachment, like what would we find? So that was kind of my starting point. The goal of this study was to gather stories to better understand that relationship and to gain insight into the function and quality of the relationship that people have with their substance that they had used, and what role did it play in their lives. So the theoretical interpretive frameworks I looked at, of course, attachment theory, transformative theory, which is to aim to elicit positive change in the lives of individuals as a result of the research, and then harm reduction was an important theory that guided me as well. So I created a narrative research project, which specifically used the method life story research, which was designed by Lieblich et al. It aims to record a person's entire life story from birth into present. I did a modified version of that, which focused explicitly on their life events that had led to them using substances. So not necessarily their entire life story, but whatever it is that they felt was relevant to how they had ended up where they were with their relationship with substances. The analysis was holistic content analysis. So the entirety of the narrative was looked at. I didn't break it up into pieces. I read each narrative for the identification of themes. From that, I got 18 themes, and then I looked at those themes and reduced them to 5 broader themes. And then for analysis, I took a look at those themes through the lens of attachment. So I recruited participants who identified as being in recovery for a minimum of 2 years, and they had to be 25 years or older. The reason for the needing to be in recovery was twofold. I wanted people to be able to reflect on their experiences and from a place of having some distance from that very acute sort of active use stage. And sorry, that's my train of thought. So yeah, so I think it offers a different perspective when you're kind of looking back on the situation. I also didn't want it to potentially cause harm to them to participate in the study. So I recruited through postering as well as online posts. I recruited 6 participants. Interviews were mostly virtual. We did one interview that lasted an hour. It was semi-structured, but consisted essentially of one question. So I asked participants, like, can you tell me the history or story of your relationship with substances? Once they had told me their narrative, then we moved on and I asked them to reflect on that narrative and consider if there was any important stages or chapters, and if there was, what they would call those chapters. And then there was some sort of follow-up questions I asked just to get a little bit more information about certain topics or to allow them an opportunity to share more deeply in some areas. So demographically, the age of participants was 28 to 56. There was 4 women and 2 men, 5 people identified as white and 1 identified as Indigenous. The age of the onset of their substance use ranged from 10 to 16, and the length of their recovery ranged from 4 to 16 years. Every participant, interestingly, identified alcohol as one of their drugs of choice. One additional person identified marijuana as a second drug of choice, another with opiates, and another with crack cocaine. So moving into findings. So this was the life story chapters that people identified from their stories. So after they had finished telling their story, these were the chapters that they identified. There was 4 people out of the 6 that kind of participated with this part of identifying and naming chapters. So I have them listed here for you to review. The chapters they identified really closely align with the themes that ended up being derived from their stories. So I think they did a great job of summarizing what they had shared. And it was super interesting process to witness because it felt like participants got to share some of the meaning they had made from their stories and really highlight the parts of their story that they thought were the most significant in their journey with substances and recovery. So I think it helped me like sort of make sure that I had heard what they were trying to convey and what was important to them in their story. Okay, so I'll move along into themes. So the first theme that I identified, I called Afraid and Alone, which consisted of, it reflects the challenging and frequently traumatic beginnings shared by many of the participants, including experiences of trauma and pain, particularly during early years, resulting in feelings of disconnection and isolation, and feeling generally like an outsider even within their families. They also noted that these experiences were important in relation to their development of substance use issues. So I have some quotes there that reflected these themes. Several of the participants described growing up in homes with parents themselves that struggled with substance use and addiction, which not only shaped their environment, but also affected their access to and their modeling of substance use. One participant explained that witnessing alcohol overconsumption and addicted behaviors in his home served as his training for his own addiction. So he described having excessive use of alcohol modeled to him, as well as witnessing and learning behaviors that are often present in people who have an addiction or addicted behaviors. So he said, I knew how to be an addict from day one. Experiences of trauma were described as having influenced their relationships, their home environment, and their choices regarding substances. In the face of incredibly painful experiences in their childhoods, participants described how they struggled to understand, process, and deal with the pain that they felt. Their introduction to substances following suffering these traumas meant that their substance use was never social or experimental, but a tool to cope with intolerable and painful experiences. They describe these traumas as being formative to their sense of self and understanding of themselves in relation to others. Participants also describe generally feeling like outsiders, so amongst peers, within their family, in their community. There's a good quote there from one of the participants that felt very self-conscious, felt like an outsider, an outcast, like kind of a black sheep. I didn't have any friends growing up, and I was kind of like, I experienced bullying as well. And when I was drinking, I felt like a social butterfly and everyone wanted to be around me. Okay, the second theme that I identified was uprooted and displaced. This one refers more to the physical disconnection and displacement that people experience in their lives, as well as the resulting disconnection from community and culture. Participants described ways in which they were forced to flee, relocate, or abandon their homes in a variety of ways, often repeatedly throughout their life. The impact of the loss of both the physical and felt sense of home is described as impacting their sense of safety, belonging, and their identity. Cultural displacement and disconnection was discussed in relation to harmful colonial practices, including residential schools. Experiences of racism and isolation were described following displacement from home communities. The theme of displacement encompasses both literal displacement and relocation, and the resulting cultural and emotional and identity loss felt as a result of the absence or disconnection from home. So participants who described being physically displaced repeatedly throughout their stories resulted in a feeling of not being rooted or grounded to any particular place, instability in relationships, and absence of consistency. The lacking a place to feel rooted in also involves not feeling like you have a place to run to when things get hard. The other impact of this is disconnection from culture and community. So one participant shared how her experiences of attending residential school and later moving to an urban, predominantly non-Indigenous community led to a feeling of disconnection from her culture and losing that feeling of belonging to a community. So that was her citation at the bottom there, and I felt very moved and impacted by her description of being able to see her little sister across the field, noticing her little brown face because she was in a sea of whiteness and feeling very othered because of it. And then the impact of how that was internalized about her feelings about herself. Theme 3 is relational and emotional impacts. So that started out with feeling that like individuals reported having no model for healthy connection to begin with. And then how substances acted as both a means of trying to find connection and then also used in place of connection. And the battleground of feeling refers to sort of there's an interesting like description of using substances as a means of avoiding or numbing painful experiences, but also that sometimes substances actually bring up really hard, painful feelings that people have been trying to avoid. And so while maybe it was attempted to use as a means of avoiding those feelings, it actually can heighten them at times. And that is what one participant referred to as that battleground. The lack of having healthy relationship models also impacted people's abilities to safely share and understand their feelings, which led to difficulties being able to name and express emotions as adults, which also contributed to leaning on substances as a way of regulating those painful emotions. And then those substances were described as trying to gain connection with others. So sometimes using with people, which might ease anxiety or make those conversation pieces easier, but also used in replacement when that connection wasn't available. And then because there was such a tie between connection and substance use, recovery was at times seen as a potential loss of real or perceived sources of love and connection, as it entails potentially the loss of community. So one participant shared how she continued to frequent bars after she had stopped drinking and would actually pretend to consume alcohol because she feared losing that sense of belonging and that sense of community. So the pursuit of healing moves into more people's moving from active substance use into a type of recovery. So people shared often an experience of coming to a point of realization in a moment, but sometimes it happened over time. It involved the concept of surrender was brought up a lot. So it involved surrendering to what they didn't know, surrendering to the unknown of what life would look like after, but also actually surrendering and asking for help to people around them, but also for spiritual guidance. I think that the bottom quote really portrayed that really well. This participant describes really getting to a point of absolutely needing to surrender, and she wasn't really sure what she was surrendering to, but only that she had to in order to really fight for her life at this point. Okay, self-discovery and building connection. So once they had moved into recovery, people talked about finding motivations for change, finding belonging in some of the programs that they accessed, finding ways to build capacity for connection, and then building a relationship with themselves. So in the face of isolation and disconnection during their active addiction, they experienced finding connection in the context of recovery-centered programs, which was identified by one participant as a motivator for change. A common element in these stories was the experience of finding friendship, and sometimes even described as family, and connection, and a feeling of belongings in recovery program. This sense of connection was noted by participants as being both a major factor in their success in recovery and a major benefit to being in recovery. They shared stories of their experiences to build capacity for establishing and keeping relationships through their recovery. Participants shared how their recovery process, they were able to heal their communication, emotional processing, and relational behaviors that had been hindering their capacity to build healthy relationships. Participants also shared how their recovery journey allowed them to strengthen their personal identity and sense of self, and develop compassion and self-forgiveness as being essential to their recovery process. Okay, so those were the themes. So in relation to kind of what I got from those themes when I took a look at the attachment research, just in regards to that relationship between substance and attachment, the findings appear to support a relationship between substance use and attachment, though maybe not exactly how I had originally thought of it. So experiences of trauma, isolation, and a lack of safe home environment, and the absence of consistent caregivers shared by participants are conditions in which insecure attachment could develop. So you could see that relationship might be there. Substance use and related behaviors might be seen as attempts to access the benefits of healthy attachment relationships, such as a positive self-perception, comfort, and safety in the absence of those healthy relationships. The potential loss of connection and belonging are noting to be fears for individuals that were wanting to move into recovery, which also speaks to that connection and attachment piece. So this suggests that seeking closeness through substance use may have served as a functional substitute for the absence of healthy attachments. It is important to note, though, that despite the obstacles that substances are noted to have caused in their pursuit of relationship, it would be overly simplistic to conclude that substances inhibit genuine connection, as there was evidence in the participant narratives of individuals having meaningful and significant relationships during periods of heavy substance use. So I think that's really important to point out. That, substance use and addiction does not mean a lack of capacity to build that connection, but I think more so in the absence of those healthy relationships, that substance use was there as a sort of a replacement or to try to attempt to get to those healthy relationships. So a big factor that was brought up in the stories was loneliness. Participants described a general feeling of being isolated and lonely, and that this played a major role in their use of substances. What we know from the research on loneliness is that it results from specific unmet relational needs. And so it makes sense that individuals who are not experiencing having those needs met in relationships might feel a heightened sense of loneliness. These heightened real or perceived experiences of being alone in combination with difficulty regulating painful emotions is a common element throughout the narratives. So important to note that being alone and feeling alone are considered different things, right? So there was isolation, is physical isolation within the stories, but there was also times of loneliness where people felt alone regardless of whether or not they really were alone. The part that I found exceptionally interesting actually was the connection to place and home, which was something that I hadn't thought about beforehand. So a sense of belonging to a place or home plays an important role in the meaning that people make from their lives. The absence of a feeling of being at home was described as impacting the participant's sense of self, belonging, connection, and safety. So I took a look at place attachment, which I had never actually explored before, which is defined as the bonding between people and places. It suggested that attachment to home may offer similar benefits to a person's sense of safety as their attachment to a caregiver in childhood. So similar to the behaviors people exhibited in relationships to seek closeness, particularly in difficult moments, like when you're sick or you're sad, that people also do this with the places that they call home and that they're attached to. So in moments of distress, of course, we do this, right? You seek out a comfortable space or a familiar space, somewhere that you know you can let your guard down and be at home. So lacking that place attachment leaves individuals without a place to feel safe, especially when they're facing hardships. Not having a place to run to was a major theme. Historical and present-day harm experienced by Indigenous peoples within colonization disrupts and disconnects individuals, families, and communities from significant places, practices, and relationships, which would constitute essentially a disconnect from the culture, which is made up of language, community, spirituality, customs, and is incredibly important in the development of identity and overall wellness. Historical and lived trauma is positively associated with substance use, and these issues may be compounded by intergenerational trauma. The study data illustrates the interconnectedness of place, community, and identity, and can be seen as similar to the benefits of relational attachment. Returning to land practices, culture, spirituality, and language appears to be a part of the healing path. As these connections are restored, so is an individual's sense of home, safety, belonging, and connection. I also loved within the data how much people talked about their connection to self, which is, again, a type of attachment that I hadn't really considered before. So they describe establishing for the first time or reestablishing a connection to themselves that feels safe, fulfilling, and joyful. So just being within themselves, that they can experience that safety and joy, which people in addiction and active stages of addiction often describe as that inability to be with oneself, right? Research suggests that a positive relationship with self may be able to satisfy at least some unmet relational needs, which is great. So in the absence of those attachments, that you can actually find some of those needs from within a relationship with self. Participant stories suggest that finding peace or home within oneself might be integral to healing. An authentic relationship with self and self-trust are noted to benefit health and positive change as they encourage self-validation and self-advocacy. Research supports the importance of taking accountability for decisions and their impact and facing difficult emotions without avoiding them in the process of recovery. So therefore, developing self-compassion and forgiveness is really important in order to develop that positive self-perception. So participant narratives serve as examples of how disconnection with others, the environment, culture, and spiritual identity contribute to a lack of clear self-identity and fractured relationships with self. Activities described to strengthen their self-identity and recovery included attending 12-step programming, pursuing educational and professional goals, mending relationships, finding hobbies, and refocusing on their relational roles, such as like being a sister and a spouse and a parent. So, I guess going back to my original question, is the relationship people have with substances a true relationship in the same way that we look at attachment? So the study aimed to explore whether using substances in the face of disconnection and painful emotional states could be seen itself as a relationship or pursuit of connection. Participants' perspectives on the quality of their relationship to substances definitely differed across the study. So 2 participants spoke about trying to meet attachment needs through the use of substances. So that was pretty explicit. 2 others spoke about its capacity to improve their ability to navigate relationships and alleviate the pain of struggling relationally. So that's more what I refer to as that conduit. So the substances themselves, they didn't focus on that as being a relationship so much as it being the thing that helped them develop relationship, or that they attempted to develop relationship. Finally, and 2 others frame their connection to substances through its capacity to create chaos in their lives, making healthy relationships unattainable. So therefore, although individuals perceived and understand their relationship with substances differently, substances may have served a function in alleviating or improving feelings of disconnection. So whether participants relate to this relationship as an attachment, it appears likely that some of the benefits provided by their drug of choice are similar to those associated with relational attachment, or place attachment, or attachment to self. So limitations. So I looked at substance use broadly, not a specific substance. However, all of the participants identified alcohol as a drug of choice, and so that sort of shifted what lens I was looking through. It was meant to be broad, but it wasn't really in actuality. I had defined recovery really broadly so that it didn't exclude people from the study that were in recovery, but not necessarily sober entirely or abstaining fully from substances. But largely the people within the study identified with the sobriety terminology and that idea. And there was poor representation just overall, obviously, within the study. There was a lot of people who, everyone except one person identified as white. There wasn't a lot of diverse gender representation, and I didn't include data about sexual orientation. Implications for social work. Attachment is seen as an appropriate lens through which to understand substance use, and so it just helps us know that that might be a lens that we can help individuals to better understand their own stories and for us to understand them better. And I hope that my study data provided a lens to support the possibility of reframing substance use as resiliency and resistance through seeking fulfillment of vital attachment needs that we all have in the absence of those healthy attachments, finding the courage and the resiliency to find other ways to have those needs met. So, in conclusion, this project definitely deepened my passion for the essential role of social workers in sharing and co-creating people's stories. My hope is that the retelling of addiction narratives through the lens of attachment contributes to challenging bias while also increasing empathy. The findings highlight the invaluable role of connection in people's lives, as well as the potential costs of disconnection. The stories shared by these participants invite a new way of thinking about home, valuing and reframing how we create home within ourselves, in our relationships, and within the land and spaces we inhabit. Yeah, so that's that. Thank you. Sorry, need to stop sharing. There we go. I just wanted to open it up to general discussion if anybody has any thoughts, questions that they want to pose.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. Okay. I'm in my I'm an undergraduate in my first year of social work, pre-basic social work, and I am in recovery right now. I was born addicted. I was an addict for 20 years, intravenous use. I used everything you could mention, drugs, alcohol, and I'm in university now. I have 4 months clean, like off of every, I don't even smoke. I don't smoke weed or nothing. I'm on methadone, but I'm coming off that 3 milligrams a month, and I'm in full withdrawal right now from the methadone, but I'm too busy to even think about that. So but school is really helping me stay clean because I literally don't have time for myself. And but this thing is really good. And what you mentioned here in this presentation here is all good stuff. Like it's helping me pick up more tools, as they say.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and congratulations. Sounds like
Mhm.
you're on an amazing journey. So I appreciate you sharing that, and yeah, I appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Hi, Regan. It's Arisha. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your research. I look forward to actually, like, we will get the recording, yes.
I
Hi,
know.
Kira. Oh, okay, no, that's okay. That's okay. No, but I was just thinking about it, but it's okay if we don't get it because like it was a lot of really cool things to think about. I really hadn't thought of attachment as relating to substance use, and so I thought that was really interesting. And I particularly the meaning making piece of like getting participants to tell their story and like understand it from their perspective and like have them make the chapters. I thought that was really, really cool and really beautiful way to put it. So thank you so much, Reagan.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I can say that that was definitely the best part of this whole process. Anyone out there who had has pursued a thesis or is thinking about it, it's lots of work, but the actually getting to sit with people and hear their stories, which people were so gracious to share with me and really vulnerable and honest with their experiences, it felt like a massive privilege. So I really appreciated that, and it was a great experience.
Regan, there's a comment in the chat here. It says earlier you mentioned that recovery doesn't necessarily mean sobriety. I know recovery is more of a process than a goal line, but could you give an example? For example, what would recovery mean for a smoker if they don't stop smoking? Would that just mean cutting down?
Hmm. I think great question. I think I really believe that recovery is a process that each person defines for themselves. And so I think if you were to find yourself in a situation where you feel that your use of a particular substance is causing problems for you, and you feel those compulsive urges to use that substance and you're relying on it as a means of coping and numbing difficult emotions or moving through those things, any, I guess, process that you engage with that you feel is helping you manage that relationship. So if we look at it as a relationship, then you can kind of look at it as, so how is it that you're managing that relationship? How are you shifting that relationship in a way that is no longer causing you those same difficulties? So for some people, that's that they have a difficult relationship with a particular substance, but they are able to manage a relationship with a different substance in a different way, and so they find that, okay, I can't use substance X, but I'm able to manage these other substances, and so that's where they find their journey takes them. I think for some people maybe it is that they find a way to use less in a way that causes them less harm. So I think it really is individual. It would be hard to say exactly what the definition is. I think it's really like it is a process. It's something that they continue to sort of ongoing make choices and changes that to manage that vulnerability to that substance or that difficult relationship. So I don't think that the language of sort of abstaining fully appeals to everybody, and nor does it work for everybody. I think it's what we talk about lots in addiction recovery because a lot of people do take that route. Um, but not everybody does. And so I think that that's talked about a little bit less maybe. But it also leaves room for different thoughts and perspectives on people's relationships with those substances. And I think it also leaves room for like relapse, or people who, you know, they may have had a period of sobriety or abstaining, and then they relapse, and then they feel as though they're like no longer in recovery. I think that opens up the doors for those folks as well to continue to talk about their recovery and engage with that concept.
All right. Any other questions for Regan? Some nice discussion here. Some comments in the chat just thanking you for sharing your knowledge.
Thanks for everybody's patience while I tried to figure out technology today.
That is just, I think, our new reality, you know?
I've never used Teams. This is the first
I
Teams
know.
I've had. So I was like, I don't know where anything is. Anyway.
Teams is very, it is, yeah, everything looks slightly different. There was a question about recording. We do record these lunch and learn so that they can be made available if someone would like to listen or someone wasn't able to make it. Okay, so I guess one last call for questions. And if not, we'll let you get 15 minutes of your lunch break back, which might be appreciated for some. Hearing nothing, Regan, thank you so much for coming and sharing your wonderful thesis with us and your research. And I hope that you, I hope that you can consider presenting this elsewhere or writing up your findings. I think there's more to be done here for sure. And thanks to everyone else for coming to the Lunch and Learn. We will be back in January with another. Where can the recordings be found? Sue, are you posting those recordings on the website, or would they just need to email us? Sue is typing here.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to post on the website, but I'll send the link out to everybody.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sue. So yeah, you will get the link because you attended today. And I think that's everything. Thank you again, Regan, and wishing everyone a wonderful rest of the semester, rest of the year here for those of you who are finishing up the term. All the best, and we'll see you again in the new year. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks so much, everybody.